All right, Coos, rolling into the Gonzaga conversation. I've seen a lot of West Virginia fans, specifically, who are upset at this. This isn't the Big 12 moving toward a Power 5 candidate. This is the Big 12 going basketball only to the far end of the earth to get a Gonzaga. As a West Virginia guy first, is this a move that you think will hurt the Big 12?
Yes. For short answer, yes. I think it's too risky because you got to think about this from a West Virginia fan's perspective. We lived through the Big East days. The reason the Big East didn't make it is because there were so many basketball schools and they had different agendas than the football schools, and they couldn't vote. They couldn't agree on TV deal and yada, yada. It falls apart. It becomes a basketball only conference, right? Schools like West Virginia had to find a new home. Well, and I'm not saying this would necessarily equal that, but it's starting to trend in that direction. You know what I'm saying? And that worries me a little bit. And then just the geographics of it. I'm like, why would in the world you got UCF down here in the bottom right corner of the country, and then Gonzaga up here? I just don't see. I don't see the benefit in it, to be honest. I understand the basketball piece. I know Yormark loves basketball, wants to kind of separate basketball from football in the next media deal, but is it really going to make that big of a difference and offset the travel costs and all that? You know, obviously I haven't seen the numbers, but to me, on the surface, it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
What worries me, Kuz, about this move is Gonzaga's good right now. They've been good for 20 years under Mark Few. That's a great sign of consistency. But let's say in 5 years, even 10 years, Mark Few leaves and they suck. Then did you just add St. Mary's? Did you just add a school that isn't bringing revenue in anymore in basketball? People right now they're top 5 in viewership, but you can't promise in 10 years that they're going to have basketball to lean on still. That might not be the bell cow for that university, and if it's not, there's not football to lean on. There's nothing else revenue-wise to lean on. You could lose a ton of money and be shipping West Virginia over to Washington. Am I missing something with that perspective?
No, I don't think so, and I agree with you on that. And the one thing when I thought through this scenario, the one positive I can see here, because I do think there could be some positives to this, is when you look at the NCAA tournament. Now, this is all assuming, though, that Gonzaga remains good, right? That piece is important here. If they remain good and they can keep that brand rolling, stay competitive, and stay a top 25 program or top 10 program right now, it solidifies us as, we're already the top basketball conference in the country, and I think it solidifies that even more by adding them right now. Down the road, it could, and here's why that might matter, not only from a financial perspective, but from a stability perspective. There cannot be a conversation. How can you have a conversation about separating from the NCAA, having your own postseason basketball tournament or whatever these autonomous conferences want to do? Are you going to leave Kansas out of that conversation?
Yeah.
Are you going to leave Arizona out of that conversation? Are you going to leave Gonzaga out of that conversation? Are you going to leave Baylor now out of that conversation? What about Cincinnati? You go down the list, right? Even West Virginia's got a good basketball program historically. So they don't want to have do you want to have a postseason basketball tournament without those schools in it?
You can't.
I think the answer is easily no, right? Yeah. So this could be a way for Brett Yormark to make sure, even he knows, hey, we're never going to make the kind of money the Big Ten and SEC are making.
That's right.
So we've got to do something to keep a seat at the big boy table. And maybe he thinks basketball is how they do that. So I kind of get it. I just don't know that bringing one school in on an island like that is going to be enough to move the needle.
I want to interject with this, and bear with me a bit here. You hit the nail on the head here. The Big 12 is never going to be the Big 10 or the SEC in football. Unless the top 3 brands in both those conferences leave for the Big 12, it's not an even playing field, and there's nothing that points to it being an even playing field in the next decade. That's just the way that it is right now. Yeah. So Brett Yormark is trying to get creative in other avenues. I'm not a Big 12 hater for saying that. Those are just 2 bigger brands that make way more money. That's going to be the case for years moving forward. Brett Yormark has to do something outside the box.
Correct.
Knowing he still won't make as much as those 2 leagues. But Kuz, I hear a lot of people that are out there saying that, this move, why would you ever do this move? Because you should just wait on the ACC schools. And to me, there's not really a wait thing in realignment. This isn't we'll sit around and wait and see what happens. I see why Brett Yormark could be on the offensive here. But for somebody like you who would rather see a Pitt or a Louisville, is there a way in your mind to get a Gonzaga and a Pitt in this conference, say in 2028?
Maybe that is the plan. I mean, if you want to bring in Gonzaga, but if you do that, don't you need to bring in a couple more schools from that part of the country?
Yeah,
right. To form, and then you go, okay, then we're going to have an Eastern wing, Eastern pod, whatever you want to call it. We're going to go grab Pitt and Louisville and Virginia Tech or whoever, right?
Yep.
Maybe even UConn or whatever. I don't know. To me, that's the only way it makes any sense. And maybe that's the long-term plan here. I don't know. But if it's not, then it should be, because just continuing just to add schools from the West, I just don't think is a good model going forward, because you're just going to alienate your Eastern schools at some point,
And a lot of money is to be made in the East, especially in basketball, where most of your national champions are coming from the East as well. And the West seems to be your USCs, your Cals and Stanfords we talked about, are in debt, can't get anybody to show up at games. That's becoming a dumpster fire out there, though the Big 12 still has its eyes peeled on expansion in any direction here, Kuz. One thing that is been floated out there, Immaculate texted me and said, hey, what if this is just kind of some smoke and mirrors, see if Brett Yormark can get a foot in the door in the Pacific Northwest and see what the sentiment and response from conference presidents is. Do you think there's a way this whole Gonzaga deal is just a smoke and mirrors to test the waters of an Oregon State, Washington State, or this has nothing to do with that scenario?
I think it's possible. I never say anything's, in realignment, everything's possible, right?
Yeah.
But, and I do think if you bring Gonzaga, there has to be something else at play here. I just don't think it makes any sense to grab them by themselves. There has to be some kind of angle and reason to bring them in. And maybe it is to try to hook Oregon State and Washington State. But from everything I'm reading and hearing in the news, it's the Big 12 that's not interested in adding those two schools, not necessarily the other way around. So, but maybe he sees that as a way to get the Big 12 presidents on board with adding those two schools. Maybe that's his angle. But definitely, if you bring Gonzaga, I do think it shifts the conversation a little bit. And I think that Washington State, Oregon State conversation I think the temperature gets heated up a little bit on that. And everybody has to start going back and thinking, wait a minute now, maybe this is a possibility at that point.
Well, we've been in Kuz's wheelhouse. Let's go even deeper with the West Virginia Mountaineers, who have been the big surprise of the Big 12. Coming up next, can they win the whole damn thing? This is Locked On Big 12.